Hey, welcome back, HSM, for a new episode of our series, Canceled, where we're dealing with the reality of cancel culture in our world and how we can counteract that as followers of Jesus. Now, last week we spent time looking at how Jesus would spend time with the people that the culture of his day would simply cancel. Now, these are the people that you and I might think are just way different than we are, that dress differently, act differently, even believe differently than we do. But instead of canceling, Jesus gave them compassion and concern. He gave them time and attention. So as we get started today, I want to be a little vulnerable with you, because in this episode, we're talking about loving the people that we envy. And that sounds really pretty simple, right? Well, when I was in high school, there was a guy named Ryan Ramey that was the best athlete in our class. I mean, he only played baseball and basketball, but he was far and away the best athlete on those two sports. He also happened to be my best friend. So we lived on farms next to each other. So in the summertime, literally 8 days a week, we would hang out. I mean, I would drive my three-wheeler up with my baseball glove, and we would either shoot baskets in his backyard, we'd play one-on-one, 21, wiffle ball, or he had this natural little bump in his yard that was like a pitcher's mound. And so we would mark off 60 feet, 6 inches, and I would catch him until my hand was raw because he threw so hard. The reality is he made me better, and I think I made him better too, because we were both super competitive. Now, in baseball, we played on different summer teams. And there was one time where he was pitching, and he was so good. He had a curveball, he threw a knuckle curve, he did all this kind of stuff. And I was the only guy to get a hit off of him. And he was mad that it was me and not somebody else, because he wanted to strike me out every time. But over time, I got tired of him getting all the attention. And to be honest, our friendship grew a little stale at times. In basketball season, he was the guy averaging at least 25 points a game. And I was the guy setting the ball screen so he could get open. I mean, he was the guy taking the last second shot, and I was the guy cheering from the bench. Honestly, I got jealous. And at times I actually said the dark thoughts that I was thinking. Like things like his parents were pressuring the coach to do certain things and to play him and do all those kind of things. I mean, looking back, it wasn't simple jealousy that I felt. It was actually turning into something deeper and much more dark. It was turning into envy. See, it's easy to make excuses for our envy. We tend to blame the person that we are envious of, saying or thinking things like, if that person wasn't such a jerk, I wouldn't be jealous. He isn't really that good. He's just lucky. Now, it might start really, really small, but envy can quickly grow into this huge monster. Now, how about you? Can you relate to that at all? I mean, have you ever felt envious of things like, I don't know, a friend, maybe a sibling? I mean, my brother had to put up with my younger brother, put up with me being really good at math and him hating math because his teachers would always compare him to me. Or maybe you're envious of someone on social media. And let me just say a side note here. This one is so easy because we compare the person on social media that has everything together, at least that's what it looks like, and we compare that to all of our shortcomings. In other words, we compare their highlight reel to our behind the scenes. And it doesn't matter who you are or what you do, you will never measure up when you compare yourself in that type of way. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a second and talk to that person around you and name someone or something you have envied. And I'll give you a couple minutes. Go for it. Well, hey, as we get started and to talk about everything, let's get clear about what we mean when we talk about the word envy. Now, we're not defining envy as looking at somebody else's cool new shoes and thinking, hey, those are some sweet kicks. I think it'd be nice to have a pair like that. I mean, no, instead when we talk about envy, we're talking about what happens when you stop simply wanting or wishing for something and you let it turn into something ugly, something like frustration or anger or self-pity or hatred. I mean, all of us have probably had a moment when we've been a little envious of someone. But today I want to ask you to get a little uncomfortable and maybe even a little vulnerable, because I want us to confront the times when we have allowed a little bit of envy to prevent us from loving others like Jesus would have us do. And I want to illustrate all this by showing how envy can grow over time if we don't address it. Okay, I've got some water here, and I've got some food coloring. And the reality is like when we start talking about envy, we think about just a little bit, won't be too bad. But like, just pretend on the other side of this water is my friend Ryan, this imaginary guy, okay? Ryan and I are really good friends, kind of like my story earlier. Ryan and I are both really good basketball players, and we're trying out for the team. And as we try out, Ryan gets the last spot on varsity, and I'm relegated to JV. Even though I'm the only guy that can beat him, I shoot better than he does, my percentage is higher, all those kind of things, he got chosen over me. I mean, that stings a little bit, right? Like, stings just a little bit. But that's okay. I mean, until our friend group asks about it, and I have to say, hey, it's fine, no big deal. But inside, it really stings. I mean, I say a couple of zingers to kind of put him down, and really more than anything to make me look and feel a little bit better. But then as the year goes on, I catch the coach spending extra hours with him. I find him hanging out in the coach's classroom because the coach is also the history teacher, and it seems like there's nothing left for me. I mean, more hard feelings set in as I start to think, what a suck-up, right? I mean, his dad is just buddying up to the coach, so that's why he gets all of this attention. He isn't even that good. I mean, I beat him 3 times in 21 this week and kicked his rear end in one-on-one, right? And so, a little bit more envy kind of sets in and begins to cloud things even more. But then, the girl I have a crush on, and I've been trying to get the courage to ask out, now I find out that she's going to prom with Ryan, of all people. I mean, it wasn't enough to grab all the glory in basketball, but now he gets the girl also? I mean, this school is so messed up. Nothing is fair. Nothing is fair. And so you just start to unload, and envy starts to take over and cloud everything. I mean, that gets out of hand pretty quickly, doesn't it? I mean, you can even see, when this kind of clears in, you can't even see Ryan anymore because envy has taken over and it's distorted our vision. But this is what envy does. I mean, something small becomes something big, and it stops being about the thing that you envied, and it turns toward the person that you envy. See, I envied Ryan's talent in basketball, and it turned into envying Ryan as a person. Now, there's a verse in Proverbs that warns us about jealousy, and a lot of times we use these things in the same context. And it says in Proverbs chapter 27, verse 4, it says, "Fury is cruel and anger a flood, but who can withstand jealousy?" I mean, think back to the last time that you were absolutely furious at someone. I mean, do you remember how you felt in that moment? And do you still feel that way right now? Probably not. I mean, you see, anger is a big emotion, but it comes and goes. Jealousy, on the other hand, keeps growing and growing. As you can see here, it grows and it morphs into envy, and it begins to harm us and our ability to have healthy relationships with other people. That's what envy does. So in the Bible, we find a story about a time when envy slowly destroyed a guy named King Saul. Now, Saul was king of Israel, but he had a little problem. Actually, it turned into a big problem. Saul had been disobedient to God on an issue, and so God set in motion the plan to replace him with this young shepherd boy named David. I mean, Saul knew that a new king was coming for Israel, but he didn't know how it was going to be. Now, when Saul first met David, he was impressed with his musical ability, and he had him play for him. I mean, he was like, hey, you sound pretty good. Why don't you come give me a personal concert? And he also, David did, defeated an enemy that Saul and the entire Hebrew army was afraid of. I mean, you might have heard of this encounter when David stepped up and killed Goliath. I mean, when that happened, everyone took notice. And to complicate things even more, David's best friend happened to be King Saul's son, Jonathan. And David led many missions for Saul, and he did them really, really well. But things began to take a turn when others noticed David's ability. I mean, Saul began to allow envy to sink in. And I want us to peek into this story in 1 Samuel chapter 18, starting in verse 6. It says, as the troops were coming back, when David was returning from killing the Philistine, the women came out from all the cities of Israel to meet King Saul, singing and dancing with tambourines, with shouts of joy, and with 3-stringed instruments. And as they danced, the women sang, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. So Saul was furious and resented this song. I mean, they were having a parade for David, right? They credited tens of thousands to David, he complained, but they only credited me with thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul watched David jealously from that day forward. I mean, in verse 10, this goes another place. It says, the next day, an evil spirit sent from God came powerfully on Saul, and he began to rave inside the palace. You never thought raves existed in biblical times, right? David was playing the lyre as usual, but Saul was holding a spear, and he threw it thinking, I'll pin David to the wall. But David got away from him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but he had left Saul. I mean, look at that. Saul wasn't interested in celebrating David's victory. He wanted him gone. I mean, Saul's jealousy was so great that he decided to literally cancel David once and for all. And so, now Saul's first attempt to kill David didn't work, but he wasn't done. So I want us to jump ahead a chapter to 1 Samuel chapter 19, and we'll start in verse 1. It said, Saul ordered his son Jonathan and all his servants to kill David. But Saul's son Jonathan liked David very much, so he told him, my father Saul intends to kill you. Be on your guard in the morning and hide in a secret place and stay there. I'll go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are and talk to him about you. And when I see what he says, I'll tell you. And Jonathan spoke well of David to his father Saul. And he said to him, the king should not sin against his servant David. He hasn't sinned against you. In fact, his actions have been a great advantage to you. He took his life in his hands when he struck down the Philistine. And the Lord brought about a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. So why would you sin against innocent blood by killing David for no reason? It's a logical question, right? Well, Saul listened to Jonathan's advice, and he swore an oath. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be killed. So Jonathan summoned David and told him all these words. And then Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he served him as he did before, right? Like everything is all good. Now, verse 8, when war broke out again, though, David went out and fought against the Philistines. He defeated them with such great force that they fled from him. Now, an evil spirit sent from the Lord came on Saul as he was sitting in his palace holding a spear. David was playing the lyre, and Saul tried to pin David to the wall with the spear. As the spear struck the wall, David eluded Saul, ran away, and escaped that night. Saul sent special agents to David's house to watch for him and kill him in the morning. But David's wife warned him, says, if you don't escape tonight, you'll be dead tomorrow. So she lowered David from the window, and he fled and he escaped. Wow. So she lowered David from the window, and he fled and escaped. Just an incredible thing, right? I mean, the story goes on that David escapes, And he gets as far away from Saul as he possibly can. I mean, you would too, right? I mean, the guy is maniacal. But Saul is consumed with hunting him down. I mean, he goes city to find him. His envy is so great that he was willing to do anything to take him out. I mean, here are some surprising things that happen during this time, and you'll actually hear a few of those next week. But see, David had a chance to kill Saul on 2 different occasions. One of those is when Saul is busy in a cave going to the bathroom, but David doesn't exact revenge. They finally called this truce, and they promised to not harm one another, and eventually they never see each other again. I mean, I wish I could say that Saul came to his senses and he chose to love David again instead of letting jealousy and hate turn into anger. But it doesn't end like that. It doesn't appear that Saul ever stopped hating David. I mean, not every story in the Bible gets wrapped up in what I would call this happily ever after moment. But here's what you and we can do with stories like Saul's. First is reflect on Saul's life and choices. I mean, there are a lot of lessons to be learned there. We can consider how his actions line up with what we know about God. And we can ask God, what does Saul's story mean to us? What are you wanting to teach us, God? And then we can look to the words of Jesus. I mean, sometimes when we don't know what to do, the words of Jesus can give us direction. I mean, in Matthew chapter 22, starting in verse 36, there's this expert in religious law, and he comes to Jesus with a question. It's a simple question, and it's probably a passage that you've heard before. He says, "Teacher, which command in the law is the greatest?" Seems like a simple question, right? And Jesus said to him, here it is, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important command. But the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." Now, whether we're feeling like the first hints of envy, or we're so jealous, like green with envy, that we're ready to throw a spear at someone, wherever we are, I think Jesus' words can always guide us. And this is the big idea. Love the people you envy. I mean, it sounds simple, right? But it's incredibly difficult sometimes. So who do you relate to in this story? I mean, are you like David, and you feel like someone, or maybe even some group of people, are always out to get you because they're jealous of you? Or do you feel alone or confused, or maybe you feel like you've been canceled? Or are you like Saul? I mean, even though you probably have never thrown a spear at someone, hopefully, is there someone that you thought about while hearing Saul's story? I mean, is there somebody that you really dislike because, if you're honest, you're just a little bit jealous of them? Or maybe this is the reality. You're like both of them. I mean, chances are that you and I both have something in common with David, and we have something in common with Saul too. I do. I mean, no matter how or even if you can relate to Saul or David, here's one thing I think we can agree on. We can all agree that envy destroys our relationships, because you cannot love and let envy grow at the same time. I mean, those two things are incompatible. So how do we stop being envious? I mean, it sounds like it's a great thing to do, but how do we do that? How do we stop being envious? And I think it starts by finding contentment and confidence in who God has made you and called you to be. I mean, if we want to replace envy with love, this is really where it starts, right? I mean, when our contentment is found in Jesus, it becomes so much easier to love others, including those who have the things we wish we had. Remember last week we talked about that the more we love Jesus, the more that he increases our capacity to love others. But getting our hearts right, that's only the beginning. I mean, if we really want to love the people that we envy, I think we have to take even another step. And this is where this really gets difficult. Because what if, instead of envying the people who have something that we want, what if instead we decided to celebrate them? I mean, instead of imitating the call-out culture of the world around us, what if we choose to call out the greatness that we see in others? Radical thing, right? I mean, here's another idea. when we are the people who are being envied, instead of keeping all of our good things to ourselves and our experiences and the notoriety and the influence and the power even, what if we decided to share what we have? And so in your groups tonight, I think you have a lot of stuff that you can continue to talk about. I mean, you can talk about if you've ever found yourself wanting or obsessing over or comparing what somebody else has to what you have. That's one thing you can talk about. You can talk about if you're envious of anyone. Like if there's somebody there that's like you're just having a really tough time with that. Or you can identify what it is that someone has that you envy. That's digging another layer deeper. And maybe you can talk about and dig down deep to find out if Jesus is your source of contentment or not. I mean, is he really where you get your joy from? Or maybe you can talk about how we can start practicing this idea of calling out and recognizing the greatness that we see in others, celebrating them instead of canceling them, and thinking about how we can share our things and our experiences with others and invite them in. Now, what I'm challenging you to do isn't easy. I mean, it might sound easy and superficial, but it really isn't. Here's the deal. Loving people that we envy isn't a natural thing. But with God's help and following the examples of Jesus and knowing that the gospel is empowering us, I think we can learn how to do it well. If you and I want to love like Jesus, and I really think that we do, I know I do, we have to love the people that we envy. Let's pray together. God, thank you for helping us to see that envy is only going to cloud our minds, and it's not going to lead anywhere. It can lead to this unfiltered, unregulated rage towards people and things. So, Lord, help us to not envy what people have, but instead to celebrate what you're doing in their life or what things that they have. And Lord, if we're the ones that others are envying, help us to learn how to involve other people, to include people, to build people up, so that all of us can be on this journey of living this great adventure that you've called us to. Lord, we don't want to live just an ordinary life, because Jesus says in John chapter 10 that he has come not just to give us an ordinary life, but this incredible, adventurous life is filled with following you. We thank you, and it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Hey guys, it was good to be with you. Next week, you're going to have someone different here in front of the camera, in front of the in the TV in the living room or wherever you're watching. Austin Hay, I love the guy. I've known him for so long, and he is affectionately called Mr. Hay by his group, but he is Austin to me and Austin to so many people. But he'll be wrapping up our series on canceled here next week. Don't forget, in 2 weeks, we're having a worship night for the whole church on a Sunday night during that regular time frame that you'd be in your group. And this coming Tuesday, we're having a student worship night in the student area. So let's come and pray, because I know that COVID is a big reality for all of us right now, whether it's school, whether it's families not being able to get together for Thanksgiving, those type of things. So join us as we worship and pray. And then we'll see you December the 6th in person at HSM at the movies at B&B. So we'll see you then. Have a great week.